I want to start tonight on a note of optimism. I'm optimistic about the future of the Liberal Party because we are on the right side of history. As Liberals, we have much to be proud of. Standing here today, we are the custodians of a centuries-old political tradition. Throughout history, we have stood for the individual, his rights and his freedoms. We have freed people from tyranny, and we have unleashed unprecedented prosperity and human flourishing. We have all but eradicated real poverty in the Western world. Liberalism lies at the heart of Western civilisation. It is impossible to separate the achievements of the West from the philosophy of liberalism. People who call themselves liberals form societies that have given us profound insights into humanity, produced the most remarkable art and music, and created the most remarkable life-changing inventions that have shaped the modern world. But these societies are not the norm. As Hobbes put it, life outside these societies is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. But for most people who ever lived, that is exactly what life was like. The lives that we enjoy today in the modern West are exceptionally rare, and we as Liberals played an indispensable part in bringing this about. Sometimes it's easy to forget these achievements and what led to them, particularly in politics. It's easy to get distracted by the day-to-day and caught up in the complex details of the modern state, which increasingly seeks to micromanage society and every interaction within it. But it is important that we don't, because it is through these philosophical foundations that our free society was built, and if they are neglected, it can fall. If we recognise how rare our blessings are, we should also recognise how fragile they are and how important it is that we strive to protect them. What is the future of liberalism in Australia? Part of it is remembering our past. Too many people who call themselves liberal today are not familiar with our philosophical roots, so not only have no capacity to help us return to them, but no awareness of when we've even departed from them. Inevitably, any discussion about the philosophy of the Liberal Party has to tackle the age-old question: are we a Conservative party or are we a Liberal one? Many column inches have been dedicated to attempting to resolve this tension. My view has always been that this is largely a false choice. A properly Liberal party, in the classical sense, should have no difficulty accommodating people of Conservative views. Conservative and Liberal principles should be symbiotic. They reinforce each other. Conservatives uphold a number of key virtues: hard work, enterprise, thrift, personal responsibility, patriotism, tradition, volunteerism, family values and civil society. A liberal society with a limited government best allows these conservative virtues to flourish. The greatest threat to these virtues is big government. We've seen around the world the shocking damage the welfare system can do to families, as Charles Murray has powerfully and depressingly documented in the United States. Civil society and volunteerism has increasingly been crowded out by big government. Excessive regulation and red tape undermines the incentive to work hard, to take risks and to engage in entrepreneurship. The nanny state erodes personal responsibility. And social engineering, masquerading as education, has been used effectively to weaken the bonds of community, divide people into tribes and mock tradition. Conservatives should always find common cause with Liberals in fighting big government. But Liberals equally depend on Conservatives for a Liberal society to work. A Liberal society with a limited government but no Conservative virtues would not be a very nice place to live. Liberals have a powerful interest in ensuring that these virtues are upheld. Government doesn't need to intrude into every facet of our lives if we are competent at living our own lives, and if we have our own voluntary institutions like charities and family to step in when sometimes we inevitably fail. But if the fusion of Conservative virtues and Liberal philosophy is to work in the long term, it requires two things. It requires Liberals to actually be Liberals and it requires Conservatives to actually be conservative. Liberals must go back to our roots. We must live up to the ideas of our forefathers. Too many people who call themselves Liberal today merely use it as a label, as a cover for the fact that they don't believe in anything at all. Liberal is not a synonym for going along with whatever the zeitgeist of the day is. Liberalism should not bandwagon on the latest intellectual fad just because it has been badged as progress. For example, when the state attempts to intrude on the religious freedom of its citizens, Liberals must stand shoulder to shoulder with Conservatives to resist. Among the most important virtues for Conservatives is the right to live their lives according to their own values and to pass those values on to their children. That right is under greater threat today than ever before. If Conservatives want to secure it, they too need to go back to their roots. Conservatives, in my view, have conceded too much and departed from their values too often, in sometimes using the state to propagate their values, and it is in part because of this that their own values are under attack. There is nothing conservative about trying to impose values from above. As Matt Ridley argued in The Rational Optimist, good institutions cannot usually be imposed from above. That way they are oxymorons. Institutions which are imposed from above are not institutions at all. They are fictions. They are an artifice, and they will wither away as soon as the government, grant or mandate that created them disappears. As Edmund Burke taught us, these institutions in fact arise organically from below through a thousands of year old process of trial and error, building on what we have learnt and accumulating knowledge and wisdom. The state is not the arbiter of morality. If we concede that it is just as likely that the state will impose values that we oppose on us than those that we agree with. In fact, it's probably more likely that the state will impose the values that conflict with our own. Putting aside for a moment whether it's right or wrong, if it ever were a viable political strategy to use the state to enforce our values, it has long since ceased to be. Our best chance of retaining our right to live our lives according to our values and to pass them on to our next generation is to respect and defend the right of others to do so. We see this best, I think, when it comes to freedom of speech. None of us would selectively defend the right for free speech only for those that we agree with. For us to enjoy free speech, we have to defend it for those who don't agree with us. This is actually something that Andrew Hastie is grappling with today. The Parliament's Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, which he chairs, is faced with a dilemma. Clive Hamilton, who some of you will remember as the Greens candidate for the Higgins by-election in 2009 and a frequent target of criticism from Andrew Bolt and others for many of his ideas, has written a new book about Chinese government influence in Australia. He is about as far a fellow traveller of Andrew's as you could imagine. I don't know exactly what his book argues. It probably says unkind things about some of our friends and political allies. But two Australian publishers have backed out of publishing his book because they fear possible retribution from the Chinese government and likely defamation action. The most important books are often those that no one wants published. So in the name of free speech, Andrew's committee is contemplating publishing Clive Hamilton's book. As a citizen, I want to be able to read it. Conservatives need to apply this consistent thinking more widely. Striving for a limited government which respects the plurality and diversity of our society is our best chance of securing our own way of life. Ultimately, I also believe that it will allow our way of life to prevail, because a life led according to these conservative virtues is a better life. We don't need to impose them using the state. Will the left ever accept this concept? Will they ever let us live our lives the way we want, just because we respect their right to do so? Almost certainly not. But we will be best equipped to argue for our right to do so if we've argued for theirs as well. Putting this vision into place in practical terms will be the challenge for Andrew and my political generation. it will require a different approach to some major policy areas. One key principle, I think, will be the principle of subsidiarity, or as Daniel Hannan puts it, small is beautiful. People are best equipped to make decisions when they are as close as possible to the impact of that decision being made, not remote from it. That means Canberra doing less and state and local governments doing more. Another, as Andrew mentioned, is self-government. Letting people opt out of the state for alternatives that work better for them, voluntarily governing their own lives rather than us doing it for them. One policy area that could bring these two principles to fruition is education, which I'm not surprised to hear Andrew mention as well. For example, today we have a top-down, one-size-fits-all national curriculum. It's been written and rewritten now at the margins by 3 successive federal governments, each hoping to better align it with their own worldview. Frankly, the left have used their time more effectively to do so. An alternative to not just returning to the old state-based curriculums, but is opening up the curriculums for competition by licensing minimal basic standards and as many private competing curriculums as the community wants. Inevitably, this would mean accepting that some parents would choose to send their children to schools which adopted curriculums that none of us would like. But we'd have the same right to send our children to schools which taught the things which are important to us. And I think educationally it would be superior too, because the competition, innovation and trial and error that that system allows would help us find better teaching methods than a one-size, government-fits-all mandated system ever could. Conservative virtues and liberal philosophy are not incompatible. They are codependent. The Liberal Party is the natural home of this fusion. I am the first to concede that we have not always lived up to this vision, but no party has come closer, and none aspires to govern for all Australians like we do. This is not a call for rigid ideological conformity. As personally satisfying as that might be, that is not the role of a major party of government, and nor could it be maintained. Compromise and departure from orthodoxy is inevitable, but it should not be the norm. And when we do so, we should be honest that that is what we are doing. We should not try to dress up these departures and pretend that we are actually remaining pure. Thank you for your interest in ideas. Thank you for your commitment to the Liberal cause. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.